Hello. Thank you for joining me again at my Sleepytime Reading channel. Today we are going to move on with Etiquette by Lady Constance Howard. We spent 3 segments, which all together were one chapter of the book, chapter 1, learning all about dinner parties, how to give them and how to attend them. So today we're moving on to some of the other meals. So this is Chapter 2 of Etiquette by Lady Constance Howard, and the title of the chapter is Breakfast, Déjeuner à la fourchette, and 5 o'clock tea. Now stir the fire and close the shutters fast. Let fall the curtains, wheel the sofa round, and while the bubbling and loved hissing urn throws up a steaming column, and the cups that cheer but not inebriate wait on each, so let us welcome peaceful evening in. Cooper. Breakfast is essentially a country house meal, and to be enjoyable should always be served sans ceremony. The moment people make a solemn entertainment of it, the whole charm of it is lost. Its attraction should consist of its informality. In London, except among gentlemen who are often late risers, no one asks their friends, relations, or acquaintances to breakfast. In a small or large country house, it is part of the necessary observances of the day, of the duties to their guests entailed upon themselves by host and hostess, and to make it an agreeable meal to them should be the effort of their hosts. In some country houses, breakfast is a meal which may be enjoyed any time between 9:45 and 11 o'clock. Where family prayers are held, it usually follows immediately after they are over. Etiquette demands that either host or hostess should be present at breakfast, certainly both when the party comprises any royal or celebrated personage, or where those assembled are of very high rank. When the guests are only relations or very intimate friends, then it would be permissible for the hostess to breakfast in her own room if she wished. When breakfast becomes the most agreeable meal is when people drop in just when it pleases them, and can talk or be silent as the humor takes them. Tea and coffee are both necessities at breakfast, and often chocolate and cocoa, brown and white bread, cream, milk hot and cold, butter, jam, honey, marmalade, fancy bread and cakes, with muffins in the winter, are the usual viands provided in large country houses. Where the means of the host are more limited, a more simple style of entertainment would be correct. A few flowers carefully disposed upon the table always look well. Tea and coffee are either dispensed by the host at one end of the table and the hostess at the other, or else by the butler at a side table, and handed to the guests on a silver salver, the servant saying, "Tea or coffee, ma'am?" In some houses, the tables are arranged for 2 people only, and then each have a small teapot and one of coffee, and people help themselves. This is an excellent plan. On the other hand, in some houses breakfast is laid upon a large table, as dinner or luncheon would be served, and then it becomes a very stiff proceeding. A side table, well laden with cold meat, game when in season, potted fish, ham, tongue, etc., should always be provided, and plenty of hot dishes, such as kedgeree, deviled chicken, kidneys, sausage and bacon, broiled ham, cutlets, etc. The most agreeable way is for the gentlemen present to wait upon the rest of the guests, but sometimes a row of powdered footmen, marshalled by the butler, groom of the chambers, etc., form an imposing phalanx, who quite destroy, by their well-trained solemnity, all freedom and comfort as far as breakfast is concerned. There is less etiquette observed at breakfast than at any other meal. Everyone sits wherever they like, without reference to rank or precedence. The gentlemen do not give their arm to the ladies to conduct them to breakfast. Each person, as they arrive, takes the seat they prefer. It is not so necessary to try and make conversation at breakfast as at other meals, as so early in the day people are less inclined to conversation, more occupied with their letters and newspapers than they are later on. Letters are either placed on the sideboard, so that each person on entering can appropriate those that belong to them, or the host opens the post-bag and distributes the contents to his guests. When all have finished, one of the gentlemen would open the door for the ladies, who would leave the room without any order of precedence. Or Etiquette allows that each person, when they have finished breakfast, may leave the room without reference to the rest, whether they are still eating or not. At breakfast, the hostess would inquire of her guests in what manner they would like to pass the morning until luncheon time, as a country house, to fulfill its mission, should emphatically be Liberty Hall. When such is not the case, the hosts are seldom favored with a second visit from those who have once been their guests. At breakfast, most of the good things are placed upon the table, which enables those present to help themselves and then pass the dishes on to the rest of the company. Next in the order of the proceedings comes luncheon, déjeuner à la fourchette, or les lunch, as the French call it. Unlike breakfast, people in London send their friends invitations for this meal, and during the London season, most people receive 2 or 3 or more guests each day to lunch after their morning drive, ride, or walk in the Ladies' Mile is over. These invitations are either given verbally by a lady meeting a friend, to whom she says, "Will you come and lunch with me today at 2 o'clock?" or by a written invitation. "Dear Mrs. B., if you are disengaged, will you give me the pleasure of your company at luncheon next Thursday at 2 o'clock? Believe me, yours sincerely, May Smith." Or, some people are always at home on Sundays or a given day in the week at luncheon, so that their friends and acquaintances may drop in when it suits them, without any special invitation. This is very convenient, though perhaps somewhat trying to the chef not to know exactly for how many persons he must provide. But that is a slight difficulty, which a good manager soon disposes of. And when the house is a popular one, it soon becomes easy to calculate pretty accurately the number of guests who are likely to put in an appearance on each occasion. If you ask your friends to luncheon, do not arm them downstairs as if they were incapable of walking alone, but let them come as they please and sit where they like. No precedence is observed at a luncheon party, except when royalty is present, and the host does not give his arm to the lady of highest rank, but when the luncheon is ready, the butler throws open the door of the drawing-room and announces, "Luncheon is ready." This announcement follows immediately after a bell has been rung or a gong has been sounded. The host, or hostess if there is no host, then says, "Shall we go to lunch?" and the guests leave the room and adjourn to the dining-room. In some places the servants stand in a row in the room or passage leading to the dining-room, and when the guests have taken their places, they enter the room and proceed to hand them the different dishes. When they have done this, they take up their positions behind the guests' chairs, so as to be in readiness to change the plates, bring them other dishes, etc. The butler hands the plates to the footman, and then proceeds to pour out the wine, etc. In large houses, both in London and the country, luncheon is often served like dinners à la Russe. But in smaller establishments with less servants and pretension, or where the guests are on less formal terms, the different dishes are placed upon the table, the guests help themselves and each other, and the host undertakes the principal part of the carving. Then the wine is placed upon the table, and the guests pass it round the table. At these informal luncheons, the host dismisses the servants after the covers have been removed, and only rings for them again when the next course is ready to be partaken of. A small handbell is placed by the host, or the bell is connected to his chair by a cord passed along the floor, or in many modern houses an electric bell is used. A dumbwaiter is very useful. It is placed by the host's side and holds pickles, sauces, etc., so they are handy when wanted. Luncheon tables are, as a rule, not very much ornamented, a silver cup and specimen glasses with flowers being sufficient. Coffee is always served after luncheon in the drawing-room, and liqueurs are also brought for those of the guests who like to take them. The butler pours the coffee into the cup as each guest takes it from the tray or salver presented to them by the footman. Hot and cold milk, cream, and sugar candy are always served with coffee, as everybody does not like café noir. At luncheon, if some of the guests have finished first, which must happen when there are a great many people present, they remain seated until everyone has done, and all leave the room together. It is not etiquette for each person to get up and leave the table the moment they have partaken of all they wish. Finger glasses are never used after luncheon. Conversation should be as far as possible general. It is not like dinner. Tête-à-têtes are more usual then. Claret and sherry are the usual wines drunk at lunch, and pale ale and porter. Port after lunch. Some people take brandy or whiskey and soda or seltzer or other mineral waters. Some prefer champagne or hock. Fruit is generally the conclusion of luncheon, but no other kind of dessert. Biscuit and toast are usually provided, as many people eat them in preference to white or brown bread. Soup is sometimes served at luncheon, and fish, but it usually consists of roast or boiled or stewed joints, entrees, dressed fish, sweets, and sometimes savories. Luncheon should always be an unceremonious meal, unless some particular reason exists to the contrary, in which case it becomes an entertainment like a dinner party or a ball, and would be given on the same scale of magnificence and hospitality. Banquet is the more correct term when it is a question of public luncheons, given for instance at the opening of a bridge, laying the foundation stone of a church, opening a hospital, or any semi-official occasion. To these, formal invitations would be issued, and perhaps a month's notice would be given. The invitations would be as follows. The Mayor and Corporation of D request the honor of Mr. and Mrs. G. Brown's company at a banquet at the Town Hall at D on the 4th of May at 2 o'clock to celebrate the opening of D Bridge. RSVP. Etiquette would be strictly observed on such an occasion as to precedence, and immediate answer would be sent by those invited of acceptance or the contrary. At lawn tennis, archery, and croquet parties, large luncheons are usually given, which fact should be mentioned on the card of invitation. In London, in houses where carte blanche to come and go is not the order of the day, a week's verbal or written invitation is generally considered long enough. Luncheon is a form of hospitality that commends itself much to the minds of most hostesses, as at very little expense and still less trouble as a rule, it enables them to receive and show hospitality to a large number of friends and acquaintances, to whom they might otherwise find it impossible to show civility. It is a meal to which elderly ladies, country cousins coming to town for a few days' shopping, single ladies, and very young ones can be invited, and when a fair proportion of gentlemen are present, so much the better. People can be asked to lunch that for hundreds of reasons it might be impossible, inconvenient, or undesirable to invite to dinner. Where a hostess gives carte blanche to her friends to come to luncheon whenever they please without any further invitation, gentlemen, as a rule, are more disposed to accept the hospitality than ladies, the former being more diffident of accepting this informal kind of invitation. At a formal luncheon, where the guests are asked by an invitation card or letter, the hostess would ask equal numbers of ladies and gentlemen, as it would be of material importance that such should be the case, for ladies are generally in the majority when the invitation is a permanent one, and therefore gentlemen, when invited in the same way, should make a point of going without standing upon ceremony. No hostess but what welcomes the advent of a gentleman at lunch, whether she knows he is coming or not, as they are acquisitions then, and would be ready to see that the ladies have what good things they wish. They can take any vacant place. No particular politeness is necessary with them. When a lady arrives, the hostess must show her a certain amount of attention. She must indicate a seat to her at the table, and tell one of the gentlemen present to offer her the different dishes, wines, etc., and make himself agreeable and conversational while the luncheon lasts. 2 o'clock is the usual hour in London during the summer, 1:30 in the winter. In the country, 1 o'clock is the time, as a rule, to allow of guests riding, driving, etc., before their 5 o'clock tea. When the invitation is a formal one, although not absolutely imperative, good taste requires that guests arrive within a quarter hour of the hour specified. It will be a breach of etiquette to be half an hour late. No hostess should wait for any guest after a quarter of an hour has elapsed. In some houses, both London and the country, where the daughters are old enough to do so, they dine at lunch with their governess, whether strangers are present or not. But it is a mistake that they should do so. The presence of girls not yet out is embarrassing to all the guests present. Topics of conversation that may be discussed by older persons must either be eschewed when they are present, or else indulged in just the same, which is very injurious to young girls and children. Everyone pities the governess, who in her turn looks forward to these ordeals with dread, and wishes herself anywhere but where she is. In a word, silence, shyness, general discomfort is the order of the entertainment, until the order for the children's release comes, and leaves the elders free to enjoy gossip, scandal, etc. to their heart's content. When a lady or gentleman arrives at a house for lunch without previously making known their intention of so doing to the hostess, and simply acting on the general invitation he or she has received, they would inquire of the servant whether their hostess was at home and visible, and they would wait until the servant had ascertained. But where previously invited, this would not be necessary, the hostess having already told her servant the number of guests she expected. The guest, on the door being opened, would walk in, merely observing, "Her ladyship expects me today." The servant then precedes the guest to the drawing-room, the usual place of assembling, if he arrives before the specified hour for luncheon. If that time is past, then the guest is conducted direct to the dining-room, where the hostess would shake hands with him or her, and make a general introduction to those already present, introducing him thus: Lord D., Lady E., Mrs. B., and Miss W., thus saving 3 distinct and formal introductions, and so setting all the guests at their ease at once. Luncheon should be punctual, a quarter of an hour being the outside grace allowed between the assembling of the guests and the announcement of luncheon. Those who do not arrive in that time will have to submit to the ordeal of walking into lunch, enduring the stare of many pairs of inquisitive eyes. Hence, punctuality is a virtue to be cultivated, particularly when the person invited suffers from shyness, that bugbear of many. The butler announces, "Luncheon is ready, milady," or "Luncheon is on the table," when the servant is a parlour-maid, as this is a simpler way than the preceding method. On this announcement being made, the hostess would turn to the lady of highest rank present, and observe, "Shall we go downstairs? Luncheon is quite ready." The lady so addressed, with her host, if he was present, would walk to the door, talking to the host as she went downstairs. The other ladies would follow her without regard to precedency, except when they were all strangers to each other. The ladies having all left the room, the hostess would follow, and the gentlemen in their turn would follow her. It would be a great breach of etiquette for ladies and gentlemen to go down to luncheon arm in arm. That is only done at dinner parties or when escorting a lady to supper. The ladies go down by themselves, sometimes 2 or 3 in a row. The gentlemen follow them in like manner, but on arriving in the dining-room, each gentleman takes a seat by a lady's side or between 2 ladies. It is perfectly optional whether the host, when there is one, is present at lunch or not. When he means to be present, he either comes into the drawing-room and shakes hands with his guests before luncheon is announced, the hostess introducing him to those of the guests with whom he is not already acquainted, thus "my brother," or "my husband," "Lady M.," or he joins them after they have sat down to luncheon, the reason for this being that gentlemen are often out at lunch-time, and guests not being sent in couples as they are at dinner, his presence is not a necessity. He may appear or stay away, as he feels disposed. Of course, when the luncheon is a formal affair, his presence is imperative. The hostess sits at the top, the host at the bottom of the table, as at dinner. The guests where they please, though, as a general rule, the lady of highest rank sits next to the host, and the hostess has the gentleman of highest position next to her. A polite excuse would be made by the guest who arrives after the others are assembled, when he had made his way up to the room with the hostess and shaken hands with her. If the late guest were a lady, the hostess would rise and advance to meet and welcome her. If a gentleman, she would remain seated, simply shaking hands cordially with him. The wine at luncheon is decanted, the decanters being placed upon the table. The butler fills the guests' glasses and then replaces the decanters. When the servants do not remain all luncheon time, the guests help themselves. À la Russe is the proper manner to serve large and formal luncheons. In more intimate gatherings, the dishes are placed upon the table, the host and hostess carving and helping the principal dishes. Both ways are good. The simplest way is to place the joints upon the buffet or side table, while the entrees, soup, game, fish, poultry, vegetables, sweets, and fruit occupy the table. Serviettes are de rigueur. No hostess should, even from economy or any other reason, ever deny her guests these absolute necessities. The bread is placed in the serviette, and the usual cover for each person consists of 3 knives, 2 large and 1 small, 2 large and 1 small fork, a dessert spoon with a tablespoon when soup is served, a tumbler and 2 glasses, one for sherry, the other for claret. When hock is drunk, some people use regular hock glasses, others drink it in claret glasses. Fish knives and forks would be unnecessary, and a mayonnaise or entrée of fish would be eaten with the usual large dinner fork. Small knives are used for butter and cheese, which, with toast and biscuits and small salad, should be offered to the guests at the end of the repast. For half an hour to an hour is the usual time for luncheon. Much depends upon the number of the guests. The host and hostess would do their best to make the conversation general, so that no guest should feel neglected or alone. It is equally fashionable for the servants to remain in the room during lunch or for only a part of the time. In large houses, where a great deal of state and ceremony is observed, the former is usually the case, but the most agreeable is for the servants to disappear when the guests have been helped to the various joints, vegetables, and wine, and then the rest of the dishes are presented to the guests by the gentlemen assembled, and the sweets, etc., are helped by the host and hostess. When this is not the case, as at a formal dinner party, the servants hand round each dish in succession. The host or gentleman nearest the door opens it for the ladies to pass out, which they do much in the way in which they entered it, the hostess being last. The hostess gives the signal by attracting, with a smile or word, rising as she does so, the attention of the lady present of highest rank. The gentlemen follow the ladies when there is no host present. When there is, they remain with him for a few minutes, and then rejoin the ladies in the drawing-room. If the host is not particularly engaged, he returns with his guests to the drawing-room, but it is a matter of inclination and not an imperative civility whether he does so or not. 20 minutes to half an hour is the longest time guests would remain after the adjournment from the dining-room, and on returning to the drawing-room the ladies would, in as quiet a manner as possible, put on their gloves and veil, which they take off in the dining-room before sitting down to lunch. They would also remove warm winter cloaks or wraps in the hall, but not their bonnets. The gentlemen take their hats into the dining-room with them, except at large luncheon parties, when they leave them with their gloves and stick or umbrella in the hall. The servant announces to each guest the arrival of their carriage when they have one. Ladies having carriages desire their coachman to return for them from 3 to 1/4 past. If a lady requires a cab, and has not desired her servant to have one ready at a certain hour, she would ask her hostess's permission to have one called for her, when she is ready to leave. When the hostess has shaken hands with her guest, she would ring the drawing-room bell, or request one of the gentlemen present to do so for her, that the servant might be in readiness in the entrance hall to open the door for her and call up her carriage or cab. The guest would shake hands with the ladies and gentlemen present that she knows best, and take leave of the rest with a general bow, which includes by its civility everyone else present. And that is the end of breakfast and lunch. We'll do the other half next time, where we move on to 5 o'clock tea. Thanks as always for joining me here. If you like what I'm doing, please do hit the like button or leave a comment or both. And if you want to keep on coming back, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Till next time, bye-bye.